melt is when I'm ocean waves.
Today on Nova Legends podcast, I have Bruce Deming. He's the bike lawyer, a guy that has made a career representing cyclists after they've had accidents and also pedestrians as well. Bruce, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Julian. Happy holidays to you.
Yeah, happy holidays to you as well. Well, the first thing that comes to mind when I think about you, Bruce, is that I'm a lawyer as well, and many lawyers, a lot of folks figure it's an easy way to make a living, but it's not. It's really hard. If you want to make a good living as a lawyer, generally you work for big firms and you do a lot of stuff for corporations that a lot of people don't find satisfying. Some do, and it's good work, but a lot of people don't enjoy it. But you found a niche, and it seems like something that you love to do, and you've made a good living at it. How'd you get started in representing cyclists? And is it as fun and as exciting as it seems?
Yeah, it really is, Julian. I started out as a corporate lawyer and a government prosecutor a million years ago. I've been practicing law for almost 40 years now. And I was working for a company as a general counsel. The company struggled financially, and I had an opportunity to go on my own and start my own practice. So I did. I've always been a competitive cyclist, at least since college days. And friends of mine were getting hit, and they approached me, sort of one at a time. And before I knew it, I had more bike cases than I ever expected. So I adopted the moniker, the bike lawyer, got the website and got it set up. And for probably 20 years or more now, bike crash cases and pedestrian cases are all that I do. It's 100% of my practice. And I love doing it.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Bruce.
No, I love doing it. I mean, anybody who has the opportunity to earn a living in an area that they have passion about is a blessed person. And I'm really, really fortunate to be involved in helping cyclists, because I'm a cyclist myself. I love the sport. I'm immersed in it. And I just love what I do.
Yeah. Do a lot of lawyers approach you and say, how did you find that niche? They have to express, I don't want to say jealousy, but at least envy that you were able to find something like that, a niche that you had passion for.
Yeah, it's interesting. I get approached quite often randomly, like by email, from young lawyers that are graduating law school, wanting to know how to get into bike law, which is interesting. I didn't know that bike law was really a thing, but I guess it is now.
You just made it up.
I guess I made it up. Yeah, not entirely. There's other lawyers around the country that have been doing this for a long time, but there are not a lot of us that do it exclusively. Yeah. Some of the big firms are trying to grab onto bike law because they see it as an opportunity, and they'll throw some bike pages up on their website. But they do everything else, kitchen sink. And I don't. I really specialize in that area.
How did you get into cycling in the first place?
I was in college, and I had a couple of friends that were involved in road racing. And I went to watch them race because I'd been a touring cyclist since I was a kid. And I was so excited to watch them. The first race I ever went to was a Criterium, which, as you know, as a former competitive cyclist yourself, watching those cyclists go around a closed loop course is so exciting. Crashes and maneuvering, and I just was hooked. I wanted to be part of it. Right.
So I know that you've gravitated over the years to more of an endurance cyclist. You do like events where maybe mountain biking up with a couple-day event. Why don't you kind of describe your evolution as a cyclist and the kind of competitions that you engage in yourself?
Yeah, well, I really, really enjoy mountain biking. I got into mountain biking years after I started road racing and really, really loved it. It's a totally different sport, both recreationally and from a competitive standpoint. But I've never been fast. I was never a good road racer because I wasn't fast. And I was never a great mountain bike racer either because I wasn't fast. But then they started to develop these endurance mountain bike races that would go for 8, 9, 12 hours, and eventually the 24-hour solo race, which has become my niche. The longer the race, the better my chances of ending up on the podium. I can't go fast, but I can go at a consistent speed over many hours. And so I just found my sweet spot, and I love doing it. It's fun.
One thing me and you have talked about before, and I mean, we don't have to talk about empirical evidence, but I mean, as a guy who represents cyclists, it's your impression that you're much safer on the trails than you are on the roads. It's one of the reasons why you've gravitated towards mountain biking is that it is a little bit safer and that you don't have traffic to deal with.
I never, it wasn't a conscious decision that way. But I suppose subconsciously, yeah. I mean, I think I do feel safer when I'm out on the trail. That doesn't mean that I'm completely safe, but if I wreck, at least it's on me. There aren't too many cars and trucks out on the mountain bike trails.
Yeah. Have you represented mountain bikers in cases over the years as well? Has it mostly been on the streets?
I've represented a few mountain bikers over the years, but not in the type of crash that I normally represent. These were product liability cases where there was a flaw typically in the suspension of the bike. And I was able to get, a good result for my injured client from the manufacturer, either of the shock or of the bike itself.
Yeah.
So those are really interesting cases.
Yeah, I'm sure. It also shows your versatility as well. Well, in terms of safety issues on the road, and I know you live in Northern Virginia, you live in Arlington. Are the areas of the country vastly different in terms of safety on the roads? Like, for example, how does the DC area stack up? I mean, we have a vibrant cycling community. A lot of serious cycles do fast group rides. We have an extensive rails to trails program where old railroad bends have been turned into bike trails. Where does the DC area kind of sit in terms of safety, in terms of other areas of the country?
It's hard to say for certain. I mean, I could give you my off the cuff feeling, but the fact is that I was thinking about this the other day, Julian. There's not a really good national database where you can look up cycle crashes by region or anything like that. And if there is data like that, it's not reliable. There's no consistent controls over how these things are categorized and recorded. So it's hard to say. But if you generally, read the paper and get a sense of what's going on, the number of serious bike crashes and the number of serious deaths by cycling has been going up for years. Now, does that mean that per cyclist, it's more dangerous? Not necessarily. There's just more riders on the road and more cars on the road. So it's inevitable that there are going to be more crashes.
In terms of terrain, what do you feel is the safest for a cyclist? I mean, obviously, I would think that, the city, I see these cyclists in Manhattan and I'm just like, well, I don't know how they do it, but a lot of them do it for many years and they don't seem to have any problems. But you look at the cities, you look at suburbs, and you look at small cities, and then you look at the rural, like on 2-lane roads. Do any of those type of situations make it any more or less safe for the cyclist?
Well, protected bike lanes that are actually physically have a barrier, either parked cars or maybe cones or something like that. Protected bike lanes, I think, provide a measure of safety that's greater than anything else that we have now. And I enjoy riding in protected bike lanes. You're not foolproof because they begin and end. They're not universal. But you're definitely safer on a protected bike lane. After that, an unprotected bike lane, but still a bike lane, because at least the cars are generally aware that cyclists are in the area and they're going to see more cyclists there. So, they're going to have more of a general awareness. After that, just the general 2-lane road, you're kind of on your own. And a lot of that depends upon where you're riding. I mean, if you're riding out in the country, I would say, generally speaking, you're safer because there's just fewer cars on the road. But if you're in a busy suburban neighborhood, a lot of traffic lights, and there's no bike lane, you really got to watch your step. I think that's where you're most vulnerable.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this in the past. I do think bike lanes can give you a measure of a feeling of safety that you probably don't have. I think one of the problems with bike lanes is that the visibility from cars is not great. Sometimes you're more visible if you're on the lane than if you're in the bike lane. And so that could be a problem. What are some of the things about bike lanes that cyclists should be aware of?
Well, I think you need to be careful getting in and getting out of the lane, where they begin and end. That's one thing to be aware of. But you're right, Julian, you're absolutely right. It can be misleading. I think people have a false sense of security when they're riding at a bike lane. I mean, one of the things that happens so frequently, and I'm seeing a huge increase in the number of dooring incidents where, a driver just having parked, is getting out of their car, the door swings open, whether there's a bike lane there or not, and a cyclist hits it, the injuries are usually really severe, horrible concussions, serious hand injuries, broken shoulders. I mean, I've seen the gamut. And even in a protected bike lane, often you'll get a passenger getting out on the passenger side door to your left, which a lot of cyclists are not anticipating, just as bad. So yeah, you're not safe anytime you're out on the road. You really got to ride heads up all the time.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the situation where I was reading on a group, a Facebook group, and a guy asked whether or not a motorist turning left in front of him, he's on a bike lane on the right side, who had the right of way. And my thing was, it doesn't matter who has the right of way when you're a bike. I mean, it might matter whether the bike lawyer can make a good case and make a good recovery. But in terms of injuries, I guess you always have to assume that car is going to cross in front of you.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned we call that the left hook. The oncoming left turning car was a name for it. And it is hands down the most common bike automobile crash. I mean, I'm not talking 51%. I'm talking like 70 or 75% of my cases are left hooks. So I think it's wrong for the cyclist to have a mindset of, I've got the right of way. I'm going to assert my right of way. That guy, if he's coming towards me, he's got to yield. Big mistake. I mean, sure, okay, so you had the right of way, and you can tell that to the surgeon while he's cutting into your leg to fix your fib fracture or whatever it is. Look, you got to ride defensively. And my advice to everyone is pretend you're invisible. Pretend you're invisible. Don't worry about eye contact. Don't think about that. Just if you see an oncoming car initiating a left-hand turn, assume that they do not see you and get on your brakes hard. Yeah. And that goes to anticipation too, Julian. Like anytime a cyclist is approaching an intersection, that's the danger zone. Rear end collisions in cycling, contrary to popular belief, are in fact very rare. Most crashes occur at intersections, and most crashes are the left hook. So if you ride heads up and anticipate and look for that car that's slowing down, they're slowing down for a reason, whether they have their signal on or not. And you got to anticipate that they're going to go.
How about the right turn? So a car is making a right turn onto the street where you're riding and you're in the bike lane. Is that a place you see some accidents as well? They may not yield to a cyclist in the bike path where they're making that right turn.
That's right. Yeah, that's the converse. That's the right hook. And it's less common, but it happens. Yeah. And so, I'll have clients say, well, they didn't have their turn signal on. Say, yeah, okay. But you saw them, and were they slowing down? If you're coming up on a car that's slowing down and there's nothing in front of it, why are they slowing down? And if there's an intersection there, obviously they're going to make a turn, whether they got their light on or not. Ride like you're invisible and you'll avoid that situation.
How about group rides? So, a lot of cyclists were told when we join teams and things that you're more visible when you're with a group. Traffic can see you better. But me and you've talked about this in the past. I always feel like in a group, you're also vulnerable to other people's mistakes as well, because it can take a whole little peloton, the whole group down with them. So, yeah. What are some of your rules of thumb in terms of group rides, in terms of safety?
Well, I think, you have to be aware of who you're riding with. I think you're most vulnerable when you show up for a really big group ride. Like, for example, a lot of our local shops host group rides. Some of those cyclists may be coming every week and they know each other, but a newbie may show up that's not as experienced riding in a group, in a peloton. And, they have to recognize their limitations, give extra room, be aware, watch the other cyclists, learn the procedure, learn the protocol. Group rides can be really tricky. As a whole, I don't think they're particularly dangerous, because the riders that ride in group rides tend to be competitive cyclists, and they're really experienced riders. So overall, it's not a major issue, I don't think. I would say though that when group rides go out, they need to be aware and considerate of the traffic. There's no reason why they should be riding 3 across. That's just a prescription for disaster. It's going to frustrate and anger the cars that are having to slow up behind them. And when they get angry, bad things happen and make bad decisions.
Exactly. Do you hear from a lot of cyclists on these serious group rides, like the 10 o'clock ride and 7:30 ride? those are race-like situations that happen in traffic. Historically, have you heard from cyclists from those rides, or are those rides pretty safe?
They're generally safe, but I have had situations like down in Haynes Point where a car will back out. They have some parking down there that's like a 45-degree angle. Maybe you've seen some of those spaces just as you round the corner. And you got to watch out, man, because some of those guys will back out, especially if there's a gap between you and some other cyclists in front of you. They may think the way is clear. They may glance over their shoulder just once and then back up. And you got to be aware, 100% whenever there's a parked car.
Well, you also mentioned not angering motorists by riding free across. Now, like if I'm coming up Glebe Road, which is I don't want to say a major road, but it's a through street in Arlington for folks not in the area. I will ride as close to the curb as possible if I'm by myself, just because I don't want to get people angry behind me. Now, I see a lot of very serious cyclists. They will ride 2 to 3 paths in the lane so that if a car wants to pass them, they have to pass him in the next lane. They claim part of the lane. I've never really ridden that way. I don't want to piss people off. What do you think is the best way to ride in traffic on a fast lane like that?
Yeah, there's no perfect way to do it, but I tend to agree with you. I don't tend to ride that way. I never take the full lane. Now, I'm not saying that I try to ride with my tire on the 3-inch wide, stripe either. I'm there, I've got a presence, but maybe a foot, 14 inches, give or take. I never go more than that to the left of the line. It's just my preference. I think this goes to a bigger issue, Julian, which is that we have to stop the mindset of I've got the right of way. I've got a right to be here. Yeah, you do. But the more important thing is to be considerate both of the drivers, and the drivers need to be considerate of the cyclists. Everybody needs to give a little to get along, because there's only so much real estate out there. And there's less real estate every day, especially when new bike lanes are going in. A lot of these roads are doing 2 lanes to 1 now. That means greater traffic density, greater frustration on the part of the drivers. And look, we all drive, right? I mean, drivers are cyclists, cyclists are drivers. It shouldn't be that hard for everyone to wrap their mind around the fact that we're a community, got to chill out a little bit and just, be considerate of each other so that we avoid bad situations.
This reminds me of a dialogue that I had with a horse trainer in France. She trains thoroughbred racehorses, and I asked her, do people in the cities or the non-horse race people, do they care about what happens at the racetrack in France? In America, they really don't. And she says it's really important what people think about the industry who aren't in the industry, because they give us license to run horse races. And if we're treating animals in a way that they don't really agree with, even though they could be wrong, it hurts our ability to operate in the horse racing game. But what you just said kind of is kind of the same thing. A lot of times the things that you do on a bicycle or I do on a bicycle, it may help the next cyclist down the road. If we anger motorists for no reason, maybe it makes it harder on the next cyclist that comes by.
That's right. Every time you go out on the road, you're an ambassador for the entire sport, whether you think you are or not. And that's why I always tell people to stop at stop signs and stop at flashing reds. And by stop, I mean stop. Even if there's no traffic around or you don't see traffic around, maybe there's a car approaching you from behind or down the road, but stop, foot down on the pavement, full stop. Look, some people disagree with that. They think it's okay to slow down and roll through, and some states permit that by law. But I think it's much better policy to stop and put your foot down. Every time a cyclist does that and a car sees them do it, it registers with them that not all cyclists, ride irresponsibly, because there's a lot of irresponsible cyclists around town. We've all seen them that just blow through red lights, blow through stop signs. And every time a driver sees that, they're like, yeah, another crazy cyclist. Those guys are a menace. Yeah. It's bad for business.
Yeah. Well, many years ago when I rode, people on the roads wore bright colors. We were told to wear yellow, orange, less and green. And everyone basically did that. And a lot of the kits that you'd wear have those colors as well. When I got back into cycling I guess I got back in 5 or 6 years ago, I realized that people don't wear those colors anymore. A lot of people were all black on the road. It doesn't seem to be as big a thing as it used to be. Are there colors that we should be wearing that makes us more prevalent, not prevalent, but makes us more visible on the road? Or are those one of those things that really doesn't matter?
Reasonable minds could differ on that, Julian. I think, yellow and orange is always a great idea. But what's a much better idea, especially now with the advent of LED technology, is to have flashers on. And I mean during the day too. A bright flasher on the tail and a bright flasher on the forward-facing handlebars. That's going to do a lot to make you visible, probably more than the color of your jersey.
Yeah.
And the more flashers, the better, man. Put one on your helmet. You can get rechargeable lithium battery LED lights for not much money. The prices come way down, and it's a huge safety advantage when you got them on out there.
Are most of your clients, people that reach out to you, are they experienced cyclists, or most of them relatively newbies? The ones that get injured and need you to follow.
It runs the gamut, but I guess I would say the vast majority of my clients are experienced cyclists. And well more than half of them are bike commuters. They get hit when they're either going to work or coming from work. These are the people that ride to work every day, varying distances. Some come in considerable distances, like on the W&OD trail. Others just commute into DC from Arlington, but they cross the bridge. I mean, they're vulnerable. And even though they're really, really careful and really experienced, over time, there's a really good likelihood that they're going to get hit. It just happens. You just don't have enough time to react.
Yeah. Well, are there things that government should be doing? We talked the other day about maybe allowing right turn on red can be difficult for cyclists and also pedestrians. Are there things that the governments can do?
Sure, and they're doing them. I mean, I got to give a lot of shout out to Mayor Bowser and the DC Council. I mean, they've authorized a lot of investment in new infrastructure for cyclists to make it safer, especially at intersections. This is the Vision Zero policy that was initially adopted, I think, in Denmark and has spread throughout the United States. Cities have adopted it. Arlington just recently adopted it. It took them a while. With the goal of Vision Zero is to have zero pedestrian or cycling deaths. And so our local governments, and a lot in Arlington too, have invested heavily in better infrastructure. I think more could be done in terms of traffic enforcement with two basic things. One is to prohibit right turn on red. I think it's saved a lot of lives, especially in downtown high density areas. And then secondly, traffic cameras. I think that to enforce the speeding laws and also to enforce the red light laws, that saves lives for sure, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, Bruce, this has been great. I went to your website today, and you have a great YouTube video that gives practical advice. If you get in an accident, especially if you're in the wrong, but sometimes you may not know whether you're in the wrong or right. Couple of things that you say right away is don't give a statement to the insurance company of the other party. Don't post about the saga on social media, something that all of us probably do too often. And get a lawyer involved relatively quickly, because then there might be things that you can do. Evidence is not lost. But anyway, your website's great. The YouTube video is great. Any other things that they should be doing if they get hit?
Well, one of the very first things that is typically going to happen to you if you have this happen, because no one expects to get hit when they leave the house. You're not thinking that that's going to happen to me today. And so it always comes as a huge shock. And when you get hit and you go down hard on pavement, as you know, as a former competitive cyclist, Julian, it hurts. It hurts. Even if it's just road rash, your body floods with adrenaline and it masks the pain. So the first thing that someone may say to you is, are you okay? Right? That's the first thing they're going to ask you. There's very few universal truths in this world. I mean, universally true, but this answer is always true. The answer is, I don't know, because you don't know. Your body is flooded with adrenaline. So take your time, assess your body. Don't get up too quickly. You could have a neck injury, you could have a spinal injury, and you could hurt yourself a lot worse by getting up and getting on your feet. A lot of people will do that as an instinctive reaction, will just jump to their feet, and their first concern is, where's my bike? Is my bike injured? But no, just lay there. As long as you're safe and someone is keeping, traffic away, stay put until you can be assessed.
Right. Well, what about folks from other other areas? Obviously, there's a lot of cyclists in the area to keep you busy here, but there's also bike accidents across the country. Do you work in other jurisdictions? Do you have relationships with lawyers in those jurisdictions? How does that work?
I do. I've had cases as far away as Alaska, Hawaii, and California. I get calls from other attorneys wanting to bring me in because they have a case, but they're not cyclists themselves. There may be some nuances that they don't understand. And I'll either consult with them on the phone, or if they want, maybe get involved in the case more formally. So yeah, it's been interesting.
Yeah. Last question, Bruce. From a motorist's point of view, what are some of the things that we can do to watch out for cyclists and to not get ourselves in a situation where we hit a cyclist?
Well, I think, just being very, very aware of the cyclist in front of you is important. And you have to remember that they're vulnerable. They're very, very vulnerable. You're in a multi-ton steel cocoon. Their bodies are completely vulnerable, both with your car and with the street. So these people are vulnerable. You got to take your time when you pass them. Hopefully they're riding in a fairly consistent line and they're not riding erratically. Sometimes though, and you've heard me complain about this, Julian, it's a really bad idea for cyclists to wear earbuds when they're riding. Some cyclists will tell me, oh, I only have one in one ear and it's not very loud, but it distracts them. It distracts their brains, and you need 100% situational awareness. Sometimes the driver will see a cyclist weaving like this. More often than not, it's because they're wearing earbuds. They're not focused on what they're doing. So slow down, be extra cautious, don't get angry, avoid that, and hopefully, everybody will get along just fine.
Do you think that earbuds should be banned with cyclists on the roads?
Well, they often are. Yeah, it's illegal in DC and in Virginia. People ride with them anyway,
Right.
And in the jurisdiction of Virginia, we have something on the books called contributory negligence. We're one of only 4 states in the country. We call it contrib. And what that means is that if the cyclist gets in a wreck, and if they're even 1% negligent, and that contributed to the crash, even though the car was 99% at fault, the cyclist recovers 0. They're barred from recovering a penny. So wearing earbuds is definitely, arguably, contributory negligence in a crash like that. So there's a legal reason why you shouldn't wear them.
Well, speaking of contributory negligence, we've talked in the past about situations where cyclists are on sidewalks, and that can kind of change the equilibrium because as a motorist, you might not notice things moving quickly on sidewalks as you would on the roads. In terms of liability, where does that leave the cyclists and also the motorists when you hit someone who's on a sidewalk?
Well, typically if someone's on a sidewalk, they're about to enter an intersection, typically a crosswalk or something like that. And if there's, say, a right turning car and there's a cyclist, maybe 15 or 20 feet to their right on the sidewalk, the car may not see them at all, or at least may not be visually, mentally aware of them at all. So when the cyclist enters the crosswalk, they're just assuming I got the right of way. They don't look over their left-hand shoulder. The car is coming from their left and hits the cyclist. Arguably, that's contributory negligence on the part of the cyclist. I mean, even though they're in the crosswalk, even as a pedestrian, you don't have the right to just walk out in front of the car that's going by. And I see people do that in my neighborhood all the time. It's this attitude of, I've got the right of way. Well, no, legally, actually, you don't. If you just step out in front of another car, that's negligent on your part. So it all comes back to just civility, getting along. But when a cyclist is on a sidewalk, and especially when they leave the sidewalk and they enter an intersection, you got to look over your shoulder for that right turning car, or look ahead for the left turning car. You're vulnerable as soon as you hit that pavement.
One thing you and I have talked about in the past, and it's definitely an area of concern, is on the WO&D trail, I guess probably any rail to trail type situation, you have stop signs for the cyclists. So traffic on the bike path is supposed to stop. And for the motorists, it says yield to cyclists in the street. So it's kind of a strange situation. They probably should be 4-way stops, because it is a little confusing when you think about it. My guess is that would be contributory negligence in Virginia, at least. And if you don't stop and you get hit by a car, that would be partially your fault.
That's right. Yeah, no, it's absolutely gives the insurance company lawyers an opportunity to argue that. Ultimately, it would be up to the judge or the jury if it went to trial. But yeah, my understanding is that there's a number of places like that in Falls Church, actually, on the WNOD trail. And my understanding, I've been hearing through the grapevine, although I don't know for certain, that they're going to be making some changes to those signs because they recognize the ambiguity. You know, it's confusing for everybody.
Yeah, you stop, but then you have to yield to traffic in the on the bike path. So it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you think about it. So I hope they do change that. I always tell my son, who's a young driver, and my daughter, who's also a young driver, you just stop and wait, even though it doesn't tell you to stop,
Right.
because it's just a horrible outcome no matter what happens. But
That's
anyway,
right.
Bruce, look, man, I've really enjoyed talking to you. I'm going to leave
Same.
your contact information on here so folks can reach you. I know it's thebikelawyer.com.
Thebikelawyer.com.
Yeah.
That's right.
But also
Yeah.
your phone number so folks can get in touch with you.
Sure, 703-528-4669. And, call me anytime if you have a question about cycling safety or just want to talk, about issues related to this. I'm always glad to chat with people. And if you're in a crash, I'll give you a free, complete soup to nuts consultation and tell you what I think. I don't take every case because I'm a solo practitioner, but if your case isn't right for me, I'll help you find someone to work for you.
That's great. Well, Bruce, you're a great guy and great lawyer, so folks would be wise to find you. But hopefully, there are less of those circumstances because we're gonna be more defensive riders out there. So,
I tell everyone I meet, I hope you never need me.
Exactly.
But thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, Bruce, great to see you, man. And I'll see you soon. Have a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays if I don't see you soon.
Same to you, Julian. Be safe out on those trails.
Okay, sure will. Thanks, Bruce.
Cheers.